When I first watched Eddie from the Deen show, I found myself genuinely liking him. He comes across as calm, humble, thoughtful, and sincere. This isn't the story of someone trying to manipulate people. It's the story of someone who was searching for meaning after a destructive life. And before I criticize any of his conclusions, I want to acknowledge something important. Eddie's transformation is real. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, atheist, or something else entirely, it's difficult not to admire someone who leaves behind gangs, violence, alcohol, and a destructive lifestyle in order to become a better husband, father, and member of society. That deserves respect. But I also think this documentary unintentionally illustrates a mistake that appears in many religious conversion stories. Transformation is not the same thing as truth. Let's begin with Eddie's story. He grew up in Chicago after his family immigrated from the former Yugoslavia. His parents worked long hours, and he describes drifting towards gangs, fighting, and street life while searching for excitement and belonging. School became secondary. Violence became normal. Gang loyalty replaced family. Eventually, he was arrested, expelled from school, and realized the people he thought were his brothers would not be there when his life began falling apart. After leaving the gang lifestyle, he pursued something else that promised meaning: success. He entered the nightclub business. Money came. Status came. Women came. Expensive cars came. Respect came. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became another passion, giving him discipline and structure. From the outside, he appeared to have achieved what many young men dream about. But inside, he says something still was missing. The documentary repeatedly returns to one idea: there was no peace. Despite everything he had accumulated, he still felt empty. That eventually pushed him toward a deeper question: what is the purpose of life? Rather than dismissing religion outright, Eddie says he sincerely investigated different faiths with an open mind. Eventually, he concluded that Islam answered the questions he was asking. He abandoned drinking. He gradually left the nightclub business. He devoted himself to prayer, studying Islam, and eventually creating the Deen show to explain Islam to others and challenge what he believed were misconceptions about the religion. It's an inspiring story of personal reform, and I genuinely mean that. But this is where my own journey separates from Eddie's. I think Eddie correctly diagnosed the disease. I just don't think he found the right cure. His diagnosis was that violence doesn't satisfy the soul. I agree. Money doesn't satisfy the soul. I agree. Casual sex doesn't satisfy the soul. I agree. Living only for status leaves people empty. Again, I agree. Discipline is better than chaos. Purpose is better than drifting through life. Strong families are better than broken ones. On all of those points, I think Eddie and I would have far more agreement than disagreement. So why am I not Muslim? Because none of those observations tell me whether Islam is actually true. This is where I think many people unintentionally make a philosophical leap. Islam helped me, therefore Islam comes from God. Well, those are two completely different claims. Human beings change through all kinds of belief systems. Former alcoholics credit Alcoholics Anonymous for saving their lives. Christians describe being rescued by Jesus. Former prisoners talk about how martial arts gave them discipline. Some people discover purpose through philosophy, others through family, others through military service, others through secular humanism. Those transformations are real, but they don't prove that one worldview is divinely revealed. They prove something else. Human beings flourish when they discover purpose, discipline, accountability, and community. Those are universal human needs. The real question isn't whether Islam helped Eddie. I believe it did. The real question is whether Muhammad actually spoke for God. Because if Islam is true, then I'm not simply accepting prayer, discipline, and charity. I'm also accepting Muhammad as the greatest moral example for humanity. And that's exactly where I cannot follow Eddie. Whenever I hear conversion stories, I notice something. People often focus on how peaceful Islam made them feel, how structured their lives became, how much happier they are. But they rarely spend much time discussing Muhammad himself. For me, that is the central question. Can I honestly look at Muhammad's life and conclude that this is the perfect moral example for all humanity? When I examine the historical sources, I cannot. I cannot reconcile a morally perfect God with a prophet who permitted concubinage after war. I cannot reconcile a morally perfect God with a prophet whose marriage to Aisha remains one of the most controversial episodes in religious history. I cannot reconcile a morally perfect God with severe corporal punishments or with eternal torment for people who simply fail to believe. Those aren't minor details, they're part of what it means to accept Muhammad as God's final messenger. And that's why I think the version of Islam presented in documentaries like this often feels incomplete. The emphasis is on discipline, on prayer, on family, on humility. Those are good things. But Islam isn't only those things. If I'm going to accept Islam, I have to accept the entire package, not just the parts that improved one man's life. To be clear, I'm not criticizing Eddie for becoming a better person. Quite the opposite. I'm genuinely happy he escaped violence. I'm glad he found stability. I'm glad he became devoted to his family. I'm glad he left behind destructive habits. I wish more people did. But I don't think those changes require Islam. I think they require meaning, purpose, discipline, community, responsibility. Those are deeply human needs. And I believe they can be found without accepting theological claims that I don't think are supported by the evidence or moral teachings that I cannot accept. If there's one lesson I took away from Eddie's documentary, it isn't that Islam transformed his life. I already knew religion can transform people's lives. The deeper question is whether transformation tells us anything about truth. For me, the answer is no. Transformation tells us a belief is powerful. It tells us a belief can motivate sacrifice. It tells us a belief can reshape a person's character, but it does not tell us the belief came from God. That's why I can sincerely admire Eddie's journey while still rejecting the religion that inspired it. I respect the man. I question the message. And for me, those are two very different things.